Okay, so our guest today is Ben Fisk. I think Ben has talked to a few people at this table already. So Ben has been producing maple products since he was 5 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for a very long time, I think you said it was 28 years,
Yeah,
even
28 years, yeah.
been doing this. And so again, it's been quite some time, and his operation has grown tremendously over that time since he was 5 until today. And I live in Temple, Ben's in Temple. So we were basically buying some of those products, and then Ben actually tapped our trees for many years in our property. We have about 30 maple trees. And then fortunately, Ben's operation got so large to put the buckets up just took more time than it was worth. But Ben actually just introduced us to a new person in the area that tapped our trees again this year. So again, our trees are tapped again. We get some of our maple syrup from our own trees with this, and it's been great to have this in our community. So as I asked Ben to join us today, just talk about sort of the maple syrup industry, kind of how things are going, what's going on with the weather and how that's impacting things, or if it's impacting. I heard Ben say that actually had a great year this year, which is good to hear. And then also Ben has some plans to really greatly expand his operation in Temple. Last year, he went to the ZBA and the planning board and the select board and got approved to basically build a new building in Temple on Route 101 and the corner of 45. So he's going to start doing some of that this year and then kind of expand from there. So that's exciting. He can tell you more about that and kind of the plans with that. But with that, I'd like to invite Ben up here and kind of give us a lowdown on the maple syrup industry.
Yeah, so I'm Ben Fisk, owner of Ben's Premium Maple Products. So like Greg said, I started making maple syrup when I was 5 years old. I took a field trip when I was in preschool and I got into it and told my parents all about it. And I came home from preschool and my dad made me a little homemade evaporator. And then for a Christmas present, my parents built me a small sugar house and bought me a real evaporator for a Christmas present. And so that's how it started. So yeah, when I was 5 years old, so I started making maple syrup. And during the summertime, we'd set up lemonade stands on the side of the street and sell lemonade and maple syrup out of there. And the business kept growing and growing. The time I was 15 years old, I won best maple syrup in the state of New Hampshire. And at the same time, I had launched my first website. So we had articles written about from the Associated Press that went all over the U.S. And so we had over like 1,000 orders in one night come through our website. So I took a few days off of school, packaged all of our orders up and got them out. And then I decided at that time that I wanted to graduate high school early and just sell maple syrup for a living. So I got out of high school when I was 16 years old and just followed my passion, started selling maple syrup during the summertime and winter, work construction in the summer until I was 20 years old for my dad. And then I'd make syrup in the wintertime. And then the time I was 20, I was able to get my first time employee and sell maple syrup. So today I'm 33, I'll be 34 on May 10th. So I'm getting up there in age now, but we have 20 to 25 employees seasonal, depends on what time of year it is. But so our company keeps growing all the time. And we're in the process of building a new facility this year. We're building a new 16,000 square foot facility in Temple, New Hampshire right on Route 101. And part of it has a 3,000 square foot retail store, like a farm stand and that stuff in it, and a better way to promote our product and do better tours and stuff. During the sugaring season, we do large amounts of tours. We invite guests to come in and check out the whole process. Because maple syrup, you can only make maple syrup in the month of like March, a little bit in April, and a little bit in February. All depends on the weather. So the last 2 years, we'll talk about weather for a little bit. So the last 2 years, January has been a typical January. It's been really cold. This year we had a lot of negative temps in the morning, and our high was probably like 18 to 20 degrees. So that forced the season. We didn't see any sap in January. We started tapping maple trees January 3rd, but didn't see any sap until February 4th this year. A couple of years ago, we used to make a lot of syrup in January. So the weather pattern just kind of changes all the time. And so you just got to be prepared. So as soon as it gets above freezing, the sap will run. And then when it freezes up at night, it creates pressure in the ground. So the next day when it warms up, the sap will flow up the tree. So sugaring season, the weather's never it doesn't just start flowing out of the tree and just come out. You got to wait for it. but the sugar content isn't as sweet as it used to be. So like our average this year was 63 gallons of sap for a gallon of maple syrup. So we tapped 29,000 trees this last spring, and we made 10,179 gallons of syrup, which is our largest crop ever, but that took 629,000 gallons of sap to do that. So the farther north you go, they have like a better high quality rock maple, and the sap comes out sweeter, so they use less sap to make a gallon of maple syrup up there. Versus here, we have a lot of soft maples. But this year, we had a really, really wet summer last year. I'm sure everyone remembers it rained every day, which we think calculated into the US having one of its largest crops ever in history of maple syrup. The year before was the US's worst crop, but we also had a drought that year. So we think that the rain during the summertime has a bigger play in it than anything else does, because the trees need moisture, and all summer long they build starch, and that's what creates the sap to flow. The weather in the spring is obviously important, but if they don't have any water in the ground for the trees to pull from, you don't get as much sap out. So, anyone have any questions?
Can you talk about the difference between manually tapping and the spaghetti?
Yeah. So the industry of maple syrup has definitely changed the technology, like anything in the world right now. The technology has changed. So the idea of the bucket and the spout, when you only get about 2 to 3 weeks out of a bucket and a spout, because the air is right there on the hole. When you drill into a tree, tap into a maple tree an 1.5 to 2 inches, and you put the spout in there. And when it's bucket, the air is right there. So the air goes in and can make that tree start to grow bacteria faster, and it dries that hole out. So the idea of the what we call sap lines out in the woods is that it's a closed loop. So when you pound it in, and there's a pump on the other end, so it's constantly sucking. So it can't ever let that tree to get any bacteria to it. And so the tap hole keeps running and running until the bacteria gets onto it, and then it will close it up. So that's the difference. You actually do less damage with a vacuum system than you do with like a bucket and a spout. The tree doesn't scar the tree inside as bad as a bucket and a spout does for some reason.
Is there any damage to the tree as you continue to draw the sap off?
There's not if you do it in the right manner. You can over tap a tree, or what you can do, girdled tree, you can tap them all in the same areas around it, and that does the damage to the tree. But like as far as like 1 to 2 taps per tree, it doesn't do any damage. The tree has more than enough sap to overcome what you're taking from it.
What is actually happening when you get sap out of a tree? Like how does it make sap?
So it's comes from the ground. So there's like pressure in the roots, and like as the sun comes up and it creates a gravitation pull, the sap goes up the tree to feed the buds. So right now it's all red out there right before the leaves come out. So the sap is feeding those to grow the leaves. And so that's why the sap's going up. So like today, the sap probably is going to run, but the sap at this point is you call it ropey sap. It gets like really slimy and bitter. And so that's why you don't produce any sap or make syrup right now, is when the buds start to come out on the trees, the sap has changed the texture and changed the flavor enough that you wouldn't want to use that sap to boil. You could, but you'd sell that syrup to like Aunt Jemima, blend it with corn syrup. So.
What's the difference between amber and dark amber?
So there's 3 different grades of maple syrup. There's a golden delicate, which is going to be more sweeter, more of a delicate flavor. And then it goes to amber to dark robust. And as it gets a shade darker, it just gets a stronger maple flavor to it. The same maple tree makes all 3 grades of maple syrup. It's just the weather outside that changes it. So typically on a colder day, the sap will come out sweeter and clearer out of the tree. You'll make a lighter syrup from it. And as the days get warmer and longer, the sap will get a little bit less sweet, and it will become a little bit more cloudier, and you make a darker syrup from that. So typically like a sap out of a maple tree is 2 to 2.5% is a really, really good day. But as the season goes on and days get longer and the ground comes more unthawed, the less there's more water in the ground for the roots to pull from. So the sap gets less sweet, and it gets down to about 1% to 0.8%. And at 0.8% with the price of fuel this year was like kind of where you kind of had to call it quits, because it wasn't cost efficient to truck the sap and pay for the oil. So
Just on your technology, are you leaving a vacuum on those lines or only applying a vacuum when there's a truck in the area that's ready to empty the?
No, the vacuum's on 24 hours a day. So soon as we start tapping the maple trees and it's gonna get above 24 degrees out, we turn that vacuum pump on. And so every drip that comes out, because what happens if you don't suck the sap from the tap hole, that's where the bacteria starts to grow. So like on a mild day and the sun's just hitting that side, the sap just kind of sits there and it starts to, because it's got a little bit of sugar in it, starts to grow bacteria, and that's what will clog the hole up. And like I'm sure you've seen a wound on yourself, right? If you don't clean it, it just kind of gets dirty and pussy and it turns nasty. So you're almost cleaning the wound from the tree the whole time. So you keep that clear, the tree keeps producing and producing. So
Gather you probably are not evaporating by just heat and
well, we use reverse osmosis, so we take a lot of the water out of the sap before we boil it. So usually the sap comes in at like 2%. We'll take the sap from 2% and go to 22% sugar. Maple syrup is 67 bricks of sugar. So when we go to 22%, it's about 4 gallons of sap for a gallon of maple syrup. So it boils it down. So like this year, we used about a quart of oil for every gallon of maple syrup that we made in the evaporator part. But then you have your trucks and everything else that have to haul all the sap. So we truck sap all the way from Newbury and Leominster, New Hampshire back to Temple. And so that's about 50 miles each way that we travel for the sap. So we have a building up there where there's a reverse osmosis where we bring some sap to process it and then truck it back home. And so it saves a little bit there. So
I'm curious about the forestry and the conditions for maple trees to grow. I've got a nice spot in the yard where old birch tree is about to go. I'd like to put in one of those trees that are flame orange.
yeah, so well, maple trees are a little bit, once they start in an area, they're like a lot of limestone. That's why Vermont grows better maple trees than New Hampshire does, because there's more limestone there. We're more granite based here. But maple trees, if it's really kind of wet and swampy, you're going to kind of grow a what you call a red maple or a soft maple. Like Greg's house has all rock maples around there. They're really nice trees, but it's more higher up and it's more drier surface. And so the rock maples like it. But if you plant the maple there, it'll probably, if there's a birch tree, birch and maple typically grow together, and beech trees grow with maples too. So those are the common trees that you usually will see together. So,
Do you tap anything other than sugar maple? So you tapping red maples?
retap, yeah, all any type of maple, especially if you're going by. And around us, like we have 29,000 taps, so it would be hard. It would be nice if they're all rock maples, but it's a little bit too hard. But we're at the size of the level that, like, really, if there's not 500 or 600 taps there, we probably don't even go to those locations anymore. I've got a lot of other smaller sugar producers around us that we give some of our lots off to, just to because we want to see them grow as well too. So, but as far as manpower and technology and everything costs money, so need an ROI on it. And so we're looking to see what it's going to cost us to produce maple syrup from the site. So we'll go with her.
In Quebec, on my grandparents' farm, there was a maple sugar orchard.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, we call them either orchards or maple sugar bushes.
Yeah, it was row after row after row of maple trees.
Yeah.
And the land, as you know, in Quebec is quite, it's been deforested over the years, and so it's, open fields all around.
Yep.
And these trees were just huge and just growing like crazy, and I've never seen anything like that since.
Yeah, so Quebec is produces 80% of the world's maple syrup. So Quebec is kind of where the maple syrup is. They actually have a what you call a reserve up there, and so maple syrup used to see different prices go up and down, and so the Canada government decided that they would put in what you call like a reserve, and so that's where the farmers have to go sell their maple syrup at. And this reserve would cover, like, so this is a big crop year, so probably all the syrup that gets made this year won't get sold this year. So that's what you call a reserve. So they'll just bring barrels and barrels of maple syrup there. Like last year at this time, there was 108 million pounds in that reserve, and it was a bad crop last year. So that whole reserve got used up. There's only about 2 million pounds in that reserve right now. And what happens, that covered the market for the shortage. So versus we all can buy from it. Like you say, I was short on my maple syrup, I could go to that reserve and buy from it. Anyone can. What was happening before is basically the largest guy with the most money would eventually dominate the industry because he would buy all the syrup up and have it. So on a short crop would force all the small farms to go there and pay a higher price, and then you couldn't compete in the store market with them. So the Canadian government kind of subsidized that and made it more of fair playing grounds for everyone. So
Are the trees producing all the time, or does it come and go?
it comes and goes. So the tree will only produce on, you need like cold nights around 28, 25 degrees and a days around 40, 45. As soon as it hits 55, the sap almost stops going up the tree. It slows way down. So an average tap, like you can get when during sugaring season, you get about a gallon of sap out of a tap hole. Some days you get 2 gallons of sap. This year we had one really good run on a Friday. We got 65,000 gallons of sap in a day off of 29,000 taps.
What makes the sap go up?
It's the pressure in the ground and the sun really draws it up in the warm weather. So I don't know exact physics of it, but I know if it freezes up and it warms up there in the day, it goes up. When you get 3 or 4 days without a freeze, the sap almost comes to a stop. It just really doesn't run. So
these systems of lines and that sort of thing that you use now to collect it, you said those things can run until they start building up bacteria.
Yep.
that sort of thing. So how do you clean them, or do you just replace them?
a lot of times you just replace them. You can put bleach in them. Problem with bleach is that there's like a salt and bleach and squirrels like that. So the squirrels would chew that. So then you created another problem. Sap turns to an acid during the summertime. The longer the sap sits, it creates its own like acid. And so a lot of times that you just kind of let that sit all summer long, and that stuff will kind of puke out first run of the year and get rid of it. Every year though, the spout that goes in the tree is brand new. So that's a really important part. And there's 36 inches of what you call a drop line that needs to be changed out every 2 years. That goes from there. So you take that and you get rid of that area every 2 years, and that way there's no bacteria even close to the tap hole. And there's like, every farm is a little bit different. Some people do a really good job at it. You know, there's one guy right now that's going to make almost a gallon of syrup from each tap hole. We try to make anywhere between 1.5 and 1/2 gallon of syrup per tap hole. But some people have found out like you tap everything perfect, the lines never freeze up, and you can get even more, but you have to be really, really good for that. So
You talk about reverse osmosis. I live in China, and sometimes they purify their water with RO, but it takes out all the minerals.
yeah.
So what happens with the flavor and the nature of the syrup using RO?
So RO versus water versus sap is like a little bit different. So we're keeping almost essentially the bad versus like the good. So we're taking and getting rid of the water from the reverse osmosis and keeping the sweeter sap that comes out of it. What it is a 8-inch membrane that's 80 inches tall, and it's just porous, and like depending what you're trying to filter, so they know the micron size of what maple sap is sugar and supposed to be. So it just works under pressure and just pushes it out. But the sweeter the stuff will stay in and go one way, and the water is the only thing that can make it through the microns, and that will go out the other side of it. And depending on how clean the sap is and how sweet it is, it depends on how efficient that machine will run that day. But you use the water that you get from the reverse osmosis each day, you need to run it back through the machine to push the sugar back out of it so the sugar doesn't seize up in there, and to keep the membranes fresh and clean. So
I thought the University of New Hampshire was experimenting with ultraviolet light to kill bacteria.
yeah, so ultraviolet light, they found that really doesn't do anything because to penetrate the volume of sap, it was just penetrating the top of the sap. It wasn't getting through. You know, you got a sap tank that's like 10,000 gallons through it, and then they tried to put it through like a tube, and you run it through there. We've experimented with ultraviolet lights and stuff, and that really couldn't do too much to it. It just wouldn't penetrate it. But they were trying to do that so you wouldn't get so much slime and bacteria in your tank, so you didn't have to clean so often. Today's efficiencies with like what you call a round bottom tank, you can clean them out within like 10 minutes and stuff. So that they've tried to, you know, that kind of changed that. Bacteria I'm talking about is actually out in the woods, right on the tree itself. That's the really important part to get rid of. So
So how can you clean the tanks?
I clean them every couple of days. it all depends on how busy you are. So like you look at the weather, you see a freeze coming up, you really get all the tanks dried and emptied, and then a couple of the guys will go around all day cleaning those out. What we do is like reuse vacuum, so you can achieve 30 inches of vacuum is the highest you can get. So we usually achieve 28, 29 inches. And so you're constantly in the woods looking for holes, or say a tree, you drilled it, and sometimes the tree has like a cavity and it will pull air through that, and it will actually, you can hear it come out like a knot in a tree or something. So you need to go find that tap, or if a squirrel chews on something, you need to go find where that hole is in that line and fix it. Porcupines, bears, coyotes, you know how dogs like plastic, right? So they see all this plastic out in the woods, well, they bite it and pull on it. A moose comes through. So we spend hundreds of hours out in the woods after we've already done all the tapping, just looking for little holes and anything that possibly could be open. And today's technology, they have what you call nodes, and the node will go at the end of a main line and it'll tell us how many inches of vacuum we're achieving there. So you have those all over. So you see one will be 29, one will be 25. So we know we have a hole over on this side somewhere. And when you use vacuum, you introduce a lower freezing point, or a higher freezing point, I should say. So instead of the sap freezing at 32 degrees with a high 29 inches of vacuum, the sap can freeze at 35 degrees. So if there's a hole there on a main line, will freeze, and all your trees up above that the sap can't come through that main line because it's frozen solid. So that's all stuff that you have to be looking at. And as technology has evolved over, I'd say the last 10 years in the sugaring industry, the technology has changed completely. And so they are figuring out, just the trees have always run this much sap. We're just figuring out how to harvest it better than what we're used to. Yep.
Can you talk about your distribution system? It seems like a lot of places I go in New England, I'll see your products.
Yeah. So as long as making maple syrup, I figured out that I wanted to sell it for the most money that I could get for it. So I started marketing, and we have that's mostly what most of the employees actually do work for me. There's 20 employees that work just at the sugar house bottling and selling maple syrup. There's only 4 other guys that work in the woods. So our distribution, it started out small. We started out with like farm stands and the Temple IGA stores, one of our first accounts. And then it just kept growing, and we'd keep knocking on doors. I know at one year I put on about 100,000 miles on my pickup truck all through New England, going on farm stands and knocking on the door to try to get them in. And when I was younger, it was a fight that, oh, I can't handle the account. Like it took me 2 years of cold calling Market Basket before they would accept me and get into them. But mostly it was because they didn't think that we could handle the volume that they needed. So when I was 20 years old, we want another employee. We want to do this, right? We want to conquer the world. So eventually you start getting all this stuff. And if you grow too fast, it becomes a nightmare because you actually can't handle it. So like right now we're shipping to about 700 tractor supplies in the US. And like on Fridays, we get our orders. We had over 500 orders come in from tractor supplies that we have to try to figure out how to get out our doors. And so it creates like a big bottleneck sometimes. So, but the distribution, it's just over time, our name gets out there just like anything, and people, they start calling us. Like people call us all the time. Right now we're opening up a bunch of accounts in Kentucky, Illinois. That seems to be the hot spot right now. Virginia, picking up a bunch of accounts down there right now. Upstate New York, we have a beautiful catalog that we do good, and our prices are listed. So people like that. People, if they could see it and you make it easy to order from them, they come and buy it. We used to do a lot of trade shows. Trade shows are almost a thing in the past. They're just kind of to meet and greet your customers in person now. But if someone needs something, they just type it into Google and, you can find it. If you typed in wholesale maple syrup, there's probably a dozen companies that come up, and then you have to sort through which one you want to use the best, or is the easiest, or does it have a brand name? So we're trying to build Ben Sugar Shack as a brand because, we want the consumers that always know when they pick up a bottle of our maple syrup, what it's going to taste like, that's good quality, and that they, are comfortable where it came from. There's different sugar houses, and, you go into some sugar houses and there could be some dead mice in a bucket. And do you really want to buy that maple syrup from that facility, And so So as you get bigger too, one of our biggest reasons for building our new facility is our facility where we're at now was just the thing when I was a kid, and we kept kind of adding on to it, and we're 3 different buildings, and it's really inefficient the way that we're doing it. And we can't meet any of the SQF standards. So SQF is like the highest standard for food protection. Basically, you have a company come in and audits you and stuff. So our new facility is all set up and will be all set up so we can pass SQF audit. So a company like Walmart needs an SQF audit, or like a Publix grocery chain. They have 1,200 stores in the like Florida area, and they won't even talk to you unless you can have an SQF audit. We had Cracker Barrel approach us last year to supply them with all their maple candy, and you had to be SQF audited. So we had to turn the account away from us just because we didn't have those standards. So for the last couple of years, well, actually for a long time, since I was 25, I bought this chunk of property knowing that I wanted to build a facility on it. And it just took us a while. I knew that the town process was going to be a while to get approved and everything. And so we just had to gear up and get all the plans together. And then it took us almost 2 years to get all the permits done through the town of Temple. And now we're there, we get to finally start building it. So this summer, that's what we're going to be focusing on, is building that. And once we get that facility up, we expect that we can grow a lot more. We'll probably double our business within probably 2 years.
About 35 years ago, we did market research for a company that wanted to sell maple syrup. And
Yep, probably Bascom's Maple Farm.
could be.
Yeah.
I don't recall.
Yeah, they're the big ones that sell to Japan about that time.
But what they found was that the Japanese wouldn't buy sweet maple syrup. They needed salt added.
No
They
kidding.
add salt to chocolate.
Yeah.
Do you do other international marketing?
So we're so busy, and we're such a small company here in the US that we really have focused all our research and money just in the US. Once we get to the newer facility and, we feel like we're kind of hitting roadblocks in the US, we'll definitely start spending more money in that area. But the ship overseas, especially with the freight and containers and stuff, it's a nightmare right now. I know like last summer, there was a bunch of maple syrup companies that do international shipping that they were losing millions of dollars a month because they couldn't get the product to export because there's no boats to take it. And
What's the shelf life for?
we code ours for 3 years, but maple syrup never goes bad. It lasts forever. So it's like honey, but thing about maple syrup, after you open it, you do need to refrigerate it if it's pure maple syrup. Because there's a little bit of water left in it. There's 33% of water left in it, so it will mold on the counter. Versus like maple candy, that lasts forever, never goes bad, but it dries out after a while when it just sits on the shelf. So like maple candy has a 6-month shelf life to it. To be like fresh and moist when you bite into it. Cool.
Job.
All righty.
Thank you.
You guys are welcome.
Okay. All right, next meeting, next Tuesday, we're gonna have Betsy Small. Tom's gonna be our speaker host, and Betsy's gonna be talking about some of the peace programs she's worked with. Not 100% sure what she's gonna cover. She's done a lot of things over her career with that.
Cyprus, Israel, Palestine.
So it's gonna, okay. So again, next Tuesday, and then I will send out a Zoom invite for the board members just to talk about the dues and so forth for next year. So with that, just close in the usual fashion. Most serves best.
Very good. Very good.